Welcome. Legally Brief presents the Child Athlete Abuse Podcast. I'm your host, Judy Saunders. I'm a lawyer, mother, and survivor. I work with competitive athletes and their families who are confronting abusive coaches. This podcast is for parents and athletes who are fed up, dealing with fear, and searching for answers. While I hope you enjoy listening to this podcast, the contents are never a substitute for contacting and speaking directly with a licensed attorney who knows and understands your circumstances. Past episodes of the show can be found on my website, jsaunderslawfirm.com. And when you visit the website, have a look around. I've put lots of information there for you that will help answer your questions and will provide some options for you. Don't forget to subscribe to our monthly newsletter. If you're ready to speak confidentially with an attorney, please feel free to call me. You can reach me at 212-709-8141. And if anything in this show resonates with you, if you think it could be helpful to a parent, an athlete, a friend, share the episode. And don't forget to do two other things. Subscribe to the show. Also, leave a rating and a review. I read all of your reviews. All right, let's talk. I'm glad you're here and ready to listen. All right, so this is a perfect time of year. As we were just saying off camera, I thought of my friend Katherine Starr because we are now, at the time of this recording, it's June, it's the summer months. There is a couple things that have coming out. The Olympic Games, we're in the run-up to the Olympic Games. So competitive elite athletes are once again spotlighted. There's other things that are going on right now in our world. So Katherine, I've been following very much the NCAA lawsuit against Division I student athletes. That's been going on. They had oral arguments in the Supreme Court in March of this year. And there's a lot of different issues that are going on in that case. But one kind of overarching issue that I know athletes from varying levels, not only Division I, they've been talking about the use of their name, image, and likeness, discussions about fair compensation. Are they really considered student athletes versus student laborers based on the amount of revenue, billions of dollars that they generate? And it got me to thinking, and so that's the second thing. And then the other thing that's very prominent right now in the news is Naomi Osaka, the tennis player, very accomplished tennis player, who, from what we can tell on the public side, neither of us know what's going on privately, but it appears that she's making a very brave stance and drawing a line in reference to her well-being and what she needs. And as I'm sure you'll say, what it appears to us to be, she's acting in integrity with ourselves. So I thought that this would be a great time for you yourself, having the background of being an Olympian, competing at a high level, to speak to us about what athletes can do when they're coming into this pressure cooker of a season with the Olympic Games, competitive athletes, elite athletes, Olympians, what they can do to stay mentally healthy, have some well-being, how to draw those boundaries. So I just wanted us to have a free-flowing conversation in reference to that. And then also one of the other things, the fourth thing that's kind of in this whole vortex of sports and what's going on right now, the national team member. So the individuals, those athletes that are going off to the Olympics, the contracts are now coming out for them to sign. And I was reading and looking at the 2018-2019 contract. Now, mind you, they haven't posted the 2021 contracts. And so we're about, at the time of this recording, we're at June 8th. And the Olympians are going to have to get these contracts, read them, and turn them over under somewhat of a pressure. You know, it's not as if they're having them 5 or 6 months out. So I think that the process goes is that these contracts are given first to the athletes, and the athletes are able to talk to them with their representatives, or, you know, if they even have an attorney, and then they're released to the public. So all of these things, all of that pressure. So if you're an Olympian, you're considering the contracts, you're considering your mental health, the actual training, the competition. I just wanted to talk about that. And maybe you could even just briefly give a background, your brief history and what sport you were in and what you did, and just talk about the run up to your experience as Olympian.
Okay, that was a long introduction.
I know a lot.
And one, I think I can address a lot of that. I will address a lot of that. So, but first, so I was in the 84 and 88 Olympics. I was 16 years old when I was in my first Olympics and was one of the 3 youngest Olympians on the British Olympic team. And so there was a 13-year-old, a 15-year-old, and then myself at 16. And so there was like sort of a significant gap and differentiation between myself and the rest, like the team. I mean, you have, people who are old to you at like 25 to 30, like, wow, you're like, it's like your perception and experience is very different in your youth than certainly when you're an adult. So, so my experience of like my first Olympics, the awareness or the lead up was still naive and childlike, partly because of like my age, but also like you have this dream and your dream is coming true of going to the Olympics, like everything that you train for. And I want to jump right into contracts. So I'm like thinking, what did I have like back in 84? Just kind of thinking about that. And we sign stuff all the time. And so, and I don't even know, I'm a minor and I still would have been like agreeing to something or other. And I feel like when they do these contracts, certainly last minute and everything else, is that it's not unlike when you go to sign up for a website and they say there's a little box that says like, accept these terms and conditions, right?
Yeah.
And I don't even know if the majority of the people even read the first sentence, let alone scroll to the bottom. And even if they make you scroll to the bottom until you can click on it, you're just fly through it to get to the bottom so you can click on it, right? So there's not a whole lot of, and even if you did read it, what action can you take anyway against it? Like if you read it and you don't agree to it, then you don't have access to that particular service or product that you've already made a decision that you want because you've already started the process to sign up for doing this. So now if you equate that and look at the Olympic movement, you're now in the same situation where you're like, okay, I had a goal, and to accomplish your goal, right, and your dream for yourself was to make the Olympics. So am I now going to put myself in, like, do I have the awareness and the ability to, one, say, oh, no, this contract would limit me in this way or cause this kind of future harm that I don't know about, or my parents don't have the legal background to support that or know that, or, have some sort of, or if I have an agent or whatever, you have the agent because you want to be the Olympian. So you're lining yourself up for all sorts of hidden harm that you may or may not understand or experience the problems associated with it. So, and one of those things that's like within the contract, like that has been for many decades, is the 40 rule, right? Where you can't, your own advertise or the way that you supported yourself as an athlete leading up to the Olympics, if they're not the Olympic sponsors, then you can't show or have any type of affiliation to them. You're now sort of, you belong to the Olympic movement, and you're, in this particular case, in like sort of the American, in which many other countries have adopted the same sort of IOC legal requirements around this 40-day window, which is pre, during, and post the Olympics. So you can't even like go back to your sponsor till it's sort of gone until the window is left. So as an athlete, then really you're in the same situation as you're either clicking that box and you're accepting whatever has been there, which is you don't have the opportunity to really be in integrity with yourself, which, because at the one point you're in integrity by the fact that you trained and you put yourself in a position to excel. And what we're losing in all of this is the purpose of the Olympics really is to show your higher like moral and ethical self with your ability to commit with the passion that you inherently have as a human being. So you have nurtured that to its highest level within yourself, and that's what you're showcasing.
That's powerful. That I've never quite heard it said like that, that is what an athlete is doing at that level. That is really powerful. And, I just wanted to stop for a second, because what you're talking about, it is not unintentional, giving these athletes another weight, another to put you in a bind. I would submit that giving the contracts, the national team agreements at this point, when I can only assume, probably very safely speculate that these contracts, much of it's boilerplate, much of it's carried over from year to year, could have been given way before. But you're putting the athlete, you're putting the family in a position where, like you were saying, you've trained so hard. Wait, what is this? I'm just going to sign it. But I would caution that any individual that has this contract, either they have it in their hands right now or it's coming, say, in the next week or so, that treat this as you would any other agreement. Speak to whether it's an attorney, whether it's your manager, someone that you trust that understands it legally. There's a couple provisions right out. The name, image, and likeness provision. You can think about that. You can talk about that. These things can be negotiated. They can be crossed out. So what you were speaking about the sponsors, there's another provision that I was reading about from the prior contract that's posted online. And that has to do with the reference of it carries over with the name, image, and likeness. So take, for an example, that you are an athlete that's spoken out ferociously about sexual abuse, and you feel that your governing body, whomever it is, skating or swimming or tennis, that they have not been true to how you feel or aligned with your position. You may not want your image, your face, in a campaign that they'll use. So you can also put provisions in there, saying that you have the right of first refusal, that you need to see what your name is and your image being publicized next to. So those are just, I put that footnote that this is the time. If you're listening to us and you hear this, you can go back. Don't feel that pressure that so many people do because you have trained. And this is just something I need to sign, throw in a backpack and keep going. But please go on.
Yeah, well, which also sort of brings us to this point of like sort of equality within athletes, right? So it's like access to resources. And right. And so if one athlete has a really exceptional lawyer who, that they're able to utilize, and another athlete just doesn't have that, they're coming up, they don't have the infrastructure, they don't have their entourage or people of support, like that in itself, it just creates a system of rank and order, right? Again, versus like having this, why are athletes even in a position? They're there to focus on their talents, their passion. And it goes back to like the work that they've done and the focus and the dedication and the perfection of their craft. And I like that statement. It's how I refer to myself when I train, even in my old age. I like to perfect everything, perfect the craft. And, and so now you're in a situation where it's not really your expertise. You're like at an advantage, and you shouldn't need any advantage outside of your talent, right? It shouldn't be in that, just create inequality amongst resources versus having an athlete who's had a great lawyer who's wise. We should all benefit from that as far as I'm concerned. You know what I mean? Because if it's one athlete, it shouldn't even be in the contract.
Right. That's true. Well, as you say this, I am going to post on my website, everyone, just some thoughts. As soon as I can get my hands on the 2021 National Team Agreement, I'm going to post it on the website, and I'm going to just put some just general information out there that athletes and their families, a couple of questions, maybe I'll just put up 10 questions that you should ask about some of these, more particular provisions. So that is definitely something that needs to be done. What do you think about one of the other issues? So now, if we're building a pressure cooker, so to speak, that's the first ingredient that went in a pot. So you're training, you're dealing with a vigorous schedule, the run up to the big games, the Olympic Games, or whether it's an elite competition, or, we could speak on all levels, whether it's just a travel team in a competition. So you're dealing with that as an athlete. And then particular to the games, to national team members, they now have this contract. They have to think about that. Let's pile in one other ingredient. Let's talk a little bit about what is going on right now with protecting your mental health, feeling that you have to push back. How do you set boundaries when you're under this intense pressure? And in particular, I'm referring to what's going on with tennis player Naomi Osaka. Can you talk a little bit about that and how to protect your mental health and well-being? And what does that even look like? What can that look like for an athlete?
Well, the place that I've moved to is about athlete integrity. And the reason that I've moved into that is that what I have found, certainly for myself, and then working with athletes over the years that have come for issues from verbal abuse, physical abuse, all the abuses, right, that have come through, say, for athletes. And the common denominator that I have come across is that the original tagline for Safer Athletes was give an athlete a voice. And the reason it was that is because athletes, there's the imbalance of power between the coach and the athlete. And it's really the athlete in the system. It's not just the coach. It's the institution. It's the infrastructure. It's everything else. And then there's the athlete who's their single focus, right, is to become, in like I had mentioned a few minutes ago, it's like perfect their craft. That's their focus, right? And that's what everybody around them wants in the system, is the person who's perfected their craft to the highest level. Yet the system doesn't support that to come through with integrity. And if an athlete isn't speaking, or they're silenced because they are in a process of perfecting their craft, they're out of integrity with themselves by the mere fact that if you're not speaking, it's a version of lying, right? So it's a version of like withholding. When you withhold information or withhold a part of yourself, then you're not being truthful to the system. And then the way that we tell ourselves, well, the coach isn't going to listen to us, or they're not going to change, or like we convince ourselves on every level an excuse that gives us a reason to stay there. Mm-hmm. And then once we believe the excuse that we've given ourselves, I feel is where the excuse we tell ourselves is the beginning of where the mental health and where the harm starts to happen. We start to harm ourselves because now we haven't developed a voice or developed, our abilities to communicate effectively. So we don't have someone who to be able to hear that and understand elite level sports. They're the same excuses from 40 years ago that we have today. So that hasn't changed. Like the dynamic hasn't changed and the roads are still the same. And so what I am developing and moving towards and helping athletes is to be able to go through that process with them. I want to hear what you're telling yourself. I want to hear those excuses. And I want to hear like all the ways that you're lying to yourself to like stay in the training. And my thoughts is let me develop a different experience for you and give you tools and ways to communicate, ways to hear yourself, ways to take different actions. So I want to be able to use and work with the athletes' own voice and own actions to change the environment and in a way that's meaningful to them. And, and often, for example, like their goal, if it was to become an Olympian, that may not truly be their goal. Like their goal may be, something like just where they want to compete at a high level, but they're good and they're competitive. And then when one doesn't become an Olympian or doesn't become what the goal, because it can be the influence of the goal around them, right? Mm-hmm. It can be like your parents were super successful, like both high level athletes, and therefore you must become that, right? So, and it's like, and you have the talent for it, but that doesn't mean you have the passion to nurture the talent. Right. And so if you don't have like the full recipe, for the success, then it becomes really difficult to move forward. But if you're training with this idea of like the outcome is more realistic for, like if you're a Division II program, like you want to compete in college, but also academics are just as important, but you have the passion to compete. But, and so it's like, how do you balance all that out? Like, so it doesn't matter if you're an Olympian or a professional athlete or a Division II, III, like it doesn't, or, you're just in sport, right? But I think there's the truth of the drive. And so that's for me where I want to help people to be able to be like, go to their coach and be like, I am here for X, Y, and Z. Like I'm on a full scholarship, but I am here to do this. And it's clear, like just be clear. Right. And so then it takes away like, I'm pushing you because of this. And it's like, I will show up and I will give you my 100% commitment, but this is also why I'm participating. Right. And it takes away the coach then is now in a situation where their behavior becomes extremely inexcusable. Right. Because it's sort of like, well, it's because you're on a full scholarship and it's because you're here that I'm entitled to do that. Right. And there's a lot of that sort of entitlement that then as an athlete, then you're left with, oh, my coach responds this way, my coach does this. And I've told myself, because I've witnessed those experiences. And so therefore, I'm not going to go and tell my coach because this is how they are. And then you're left in this situation of harm that's like and that's where the pressure cooker is. It just builds and it builds and it's built. And then it's our ability to shove it down and shove it down, shove it down. So you don't even hear it. At some point in time, like you need to compete to not hear yourself. And most people, like their existence of hearing those red flags, you've heard them and they go flying by. As an athlete, the more you compete, the farther it goes down and the quieter and quieter. It's like turning the volume to nothing.
But it manifests itself in other ways, I would assume.
Yes, it can't not escape, but the idea of like, well, I'm at peace with it because I don't hear it, like you're not hearing it. That's why I call it the athlete within, right? And so for me, it's like, let's raise the volume of that athlete and let's create the responses and be able to articulate. Because I imagine that is the system the way the system is because the athletes, well, you've never said anything. How can you, have you not heard that in every situation? Like, it's like, well, you never spoke up. It didn't appear that there was anything wrong or it didn't appear that you had any issues with this. So we kept doing this because there was no pushback.
I mean, that is a whole body of law, the failure to disclose, delayed disclosure, call it delayed outcry. Most of the times you see that in situations where there's some form of sexual abuse, why didn't the individual disclose? But then it's also in, physical and emotional abuse. And I find it very prevalent in, the verbal abuse, the psychological abuse. Well, we didn't know anything was wrong. They meaning the athlete never spoke out. So crystallizing what you're saying so that the listeners can really understand, because you brought up so many important points, that the line to stay healthy, to either stay healthy mentally as an athlete or to recalibrate and come back to mental health begins with the athlete getting back in touch if they've lost themselves. So let's throw out a fact pattern. So say that Mark is a competitive track and field. And for whatever reason, this athlete, he has objectives and goals that he knows that he wants. Maybe he's never told them. Maybe he didn't feel like he can tell it to a coach. Let's say that the coach, just for sake of this scenario, does cross the line as far as abusive coaching practices, the way that he speaks to players, and that the team members they've gotten into just go along to get along. They've been groomed. They've been through the different, excessive punitive punishments for not doing exactly what the coach says. So in that type of situation, you would tell the athlete to what? Now is the time you have to speak up regardless of what the current situation with the coach may be. How would you say an athlete deals with that type of situation?
So what I would do, and this is where I get into my athlete integrity coaching. So I'd go back to, I'd really want to get into a more fact-based structure of where things are at with the individual and to pull out what's fact and fiction and really get into the core of that situation. Because I find one of the things that I have found around like emotional abuse, sexual abuse, whole separate conversation.
Yeah.
But around emotional abuse is that there's the lead up, there's the incidents that happen. And then there's the awareness of the event, the story you tell yourself about not being able to respond to the event, and then the suppression of that information, right? So if my coach, or in this situation, the coach is referring to the athlete just, like, oh, you're a loser, or, just something that's derogatory in nature, right? And you could already feel like you're kind of hitting a plateau because you've lost connection to the passion, or if you lost connection to your ability to perfect. And it's because you don't know where you're going with your talent. You don't know where you don't have that direction to it, or you've lost confidence in the, like where your outcome is. Like if you're going to win state or if you're going to go to regionals, like all the goals that you have, if they're not clear, you don't have a GPS to guide you. So, and if that's not clear, then all the information that comes in from your coach then also makes it, you internalize it in a way that's harmful because you don't have the push forward with the light, if you will. So then it becomes this compounded thing. So when I hear athletes say they've been emotionally abused, for example, I want to go back in and get to, let's talk about the incidences. Let's get back to like, because there's this sort of this conclusion to the outcome. And I want to change the way people look at getting to establishing the outcome versus the events that actually most likely would have violated policy along the way. And if we would have looked at, even, and when I talk extensively about grooming, it's like, it's not, I don't like to go at just grooming because there's events that happened that were violated. If you had any type of policy in place, they would have violated the littlest of incidences. So what I like to do is I like to get back to the littlest of details, right? And to show that this pathway that, like, where was the voice of the athlete very early on?
Right.
And then we can see how the athlete silenced themselves, right? And they made those decisions. That's why I'm doing athlete integrity coaching, because I'm going back to that core. Like, let's change your voice. Let's change
the voice.
Right. And let's give you some skills and let's support you through the process to be able to speak up, to not internalize, to not change yourself and your being because someone is being thoughtless and careless and they themselves are not in their passion. And they're being lazy or, I know I'm making in the situation, but, if the coach, I've learned a lot having this puppy. And so, in part of like my puppy training, if you will, is this thing knows nothing, right? And I got to teach it to go outside, to go to the bathroom, and then to have patience and tolerance when I'm like, yesterday you got it. What happened? Right. And then it's like, and it's been this really interesting, a version of myself, which is like, I want to get frustrated because it's like, okay, you went 3 days without going to the bathroom in the house. Like, I thought we were officially potty trained, right? And then you're like, no, we're back at square one, and then it's like, well, when you look at it differently and go, okay, I am the problem in this situation. What do I need to change about myself? And many coaches and many athletes haven't taken that approach. And so if coaches were to be like, well, and ask themselves more questions, and there's some brilliant coaches out there. And then there's some coaches who are doing it because they know the sport and they didn't accomplish themselves in the same sport. And so there's a lot of leftover that's getting carried forward to the athletes. And that is also where the harm starts to
comes in.
Yeah. So for me, there's like, what can you do as an athlete? And I don't entirely just want to say mental health versus athletic health, athlete health, because there certainly is stigma around. It makes it sound like the athlete's in the wrong or the athlete's harmful. There's something, around like that aspect of it.
What do you mean by that term, athletic health?
Well, and I use that, I'm just sort of what thrive, pride, like all the principles of being in integrity with yourself. Like, what does that mean? Like, and for me, like the big thing for me is like, are your choices, do you have pride about your choice? Like, and are you thriving? And if you're not thriving, what's blocking you? Right. So there are things that as an athlete that you're excited to, like the wind is at your back versus having to be constantly like going uphill the whole way. Like at some point in time when you have that race. But what I mean by that is like, it's like being in the zone of an athlete, right? So there's in the zone of competition, like, when you're in it, but then there's also like being in that same zone with life and it just flows. And that's where I want to drive like athletes to be in and feel that the zone outside of it when you're like having to just jump into it. Like many people, that's why they still get up in their upper years and they go work out because they're looking for that high. They're looking for it to be in the zone. Like people know what that is. And I just think you can be in that zone in your career and in your path. And that's where I want to help athletes be in it. And so when I say an athlete health, like that is what I want athletes to be able to feel 24/7.
So we've spoken to athletes in particular. We've touched on some things, and I want us to come back and I want us to have a conversation specifically on ways that parents and supporters and even us, sports fans, how we can support athletes during this competitive time. And a lot of this I'm speaking about because we are in the run up to the Olympic Games, how we can support. But what you were just talking about, being in flow with athletic health, with integrity, with yourself, with your voice. Can you speak a little bit to your experience in being at the games, dealing with that pressure before, during, what about after? What can the athletes expect just when the games close down? How can they protect their mental health? The only thing that I can even think about that parallels is, preparing for a marathon, preparing for it for weeks, running it, feeling that you got a time, and then that, the letdown. But that's the only even athletic thing that I even have to compare. But I have no idea what even comes close to having the world watch you, have your country watch you, and then that letdown. How can athletes protect their mental health, to stay in integrity with themselves, say right after the games?
Yeah, that's a hard one. So you have a 4-year cycle. And so you're either so at 16, I had youth, right? So it's like, I knew I had another games in me. So that was like the first lie. It wasn't that it was a lie that I told myself about my youth and had another games in me. But what it did was it suppressed any sadness or any feelings that I had as a result of my being dissatisfied with the results, right? So I hadn't accomplished my dream that I felt that I had the talents for. And at the same time, I have all the sexual abuse stuff that's not really registering as sexual abuse, just that I feel like I'm internalizing the harm of my failure. But then it's like, well, there's another games in 4 years. So that kind of keeps you going. But it's like a drop off a cliff. Then the other thing that happens, and I wrote about this in my book, which I'm still sitting on the sidelines with. So if you're definitely interested in it, it's because I very much wrote about this part of it. And what happened is people, when they meet you and they say, oh, they know that you're an Olympian, the first question is always, how did you do? Right. And then when you didn't win a gold, there's the next part of it is almost inevitable. They go, oh, right. So there's like so much weight, almost like in their disappointment comes in those 2 letters, which then is like my disappointment of like feeling like, oh, I need to justify why I didn't win, or, like there's just this whole, like, what do I need to say about that? Right. Because it's the idea that like you want to be proud about being an Olympian, but then there's are you a gold medalist, right? And if you're not a gold medalist, and then if you're meeting a silver medalist or a bronze medalist, right, there's this justification that you feel like you're stepping right into that because they're disappointed in not having the highest of interactions of some of the best in the world. And it's not always like that, but it's certainly. And so part of what I think from, being a recipient of that disappointment on numerous occasions, spending a lot of time and reflection thinking about it, and then wanting to have like a different response to all this, because I don't want to go into my story or anything like that, but many of my friends are proud of me and want to say, oh yeah, my friend's an Olympian, right? And so for me, I think it takes, like, it's not just about the Olympian, it's about supporting any athlete, right? So it's like supporting people in their passion and in their, like, in being a place, was that meaningful to you? Were you happy with your results? Was that, because I've spoken to some people and they're like, yeah, I just want to go to the Olympics, right? And they were just from another country and they were completely satisfied with just going.
Right. So, Katherine, what you're telling, it sounds like we mean the sports community, sports fans, even close supporters. Maybe it's the neighbor that the Olympian is returning home in. We need a wider way of thinking about it. It's almost the evolution. I remember if you hear people talking about how society used to deal with, say, death, or when you lost your husband or wife or a widow, and individuals would never mention the person's name again, or they'd never talk about it, or they would expect you to be over it. And it's that restrictive way that we would deal with, these types of situations. It sounds like as a society, we've done better. We've evolved. We now know that we can talk about death, that individuals need to talk about people that have passed, that we give people time to grieve. It doesn't happen in a nice, neat package. It sounds like that's the same type of awakening or evolution that we as a society need when we look and we think about athletes. And after they've gone through some vigorous competition, how we can be more supportive. You don't just dive right into, well, what'd you win? Well, what'd you do? But it's just being there, being supportive. Or maybe you don't say anything. Maybe that's the way we support athletes after, an Olympic game. Or would you say that? Would you say that we just sit and let the athlete, I'm speaking more so, not just even the casual fan, but maybe the parent or the aunt or the neighbor. Should we just wait for them to talk about it?
I mean, you certainly can take that approach, but we also have to understand something, the identity, right? So, which is also, I wrote a lot about, becoming, like, at a young age when I started, when there was the time when you realized that you had the talents to become an Olympian, or you had the talents, like, so that becomes your new identity. And my dad's identity no longer was his. It was like, he was, since I was Annabelle at the time, that was Annabelle's dad, right? So
yeah,
that construct starts to break down after you've ended your career. And if you don't have something else and you haven't developed your own construct of a person. So when I talk about like athlete integrity and the athlete within, that there's the characteristics of that athlete can still carry on without, and you can maintain that as your identity. You don't have to be a coach. You don't have to be any of that. And so helping an athlete transition, like, you can't put the pressure on this society to be able to respond and get it right? Versus the athlete, what can the athlete do? And for me, I want to help the athlete transition out of their sport, or transition from like one Olympic year to the next cycle, right? And how do you do that? And when you're wrapped up in this, who you are, and being able to strip those talents and strip those characteristics out and allow those to continue to shine through, and teach the athlete how to respond differently. Like, the characteristics should be the outcome to your experience, not the, what did you accomplish? Did you get a gold medal? What did that create in you? What did you become as a result of it? And instead of looking at what color is your medal or what place did you get, there's parts of you that became so developed as a person that those are the things that I can teach athletes how to lead with that in their conversation. It's like my niece, she was a very kind of a withdrawn kid. She was just kind of to herself, very introverted, if you will, at a young age. And then she did, I think, karate or taekwondo or one of those martial arts. And she started to show, she just came out of her shell. And then she started to develop as it gave her confidence, right? It gave her confidence as a person. And she went through college, got into, I'm going to brag about my niece for a second.
Good.
Because, and in school, she was just considered average, right? And, she went to Wisconsin. She'll know, if she listens to this, she'll know that I'm talking about this particular niece. And she went to Wisconsin, wanted to be an engineer. And she was just kind of like, her teachers were just like, you're just going to be an average kid, right? And it turned out that this average kid that got into karate or taekwondo, and I just saw the way she saw how to develop and became a black belt, and she got to the highest level, right? Well, she just graduated from college, top of her class at Wisconsin, and got into Stanford, into their master's engineering program on a scholarship, right? And this is a kid that started off with, instead of, well, did you become the best person in that sport? She got to the highest belt, I think. I think there's probably multiple black belts and what have you. But the characteristics that came out of sport carried with her.
So she had the ability to transition that. That's what it sounds like is key in after the Olympic Games, after athletes, supporters, parents, how to transition, being aware and taking those characteristics and transitioning that to a new area. That sounds like that's the best thing that athletes can do. Because I think you reminded me, and then I even looked it up in one of our prior conversations, the statistics about how high it is a suicide rate among former athletes, which is a very sad thing. And, I could speculate that there's several reasons why, but one could be that identity and having that identity either misused by yourself or others around you, and you never are able to make that transition. I'm sure there's a host of other reasons, but I love this conversation. I know I don't want to take up the entirety of your day. I think we've been talking now about maybe 50 minutes, but I would think that some of the takeaways that I know that from our conversation for parents, for athletes, whether they're going into the Olympic Games in a month or so, to start with that voice within you, that's paramount to speaking out, to knowing that you can give. Katherine Starr is giving you the permission right now. You heard it here. You can speak out regardless of the situation. And speaking out could be, against your parents, or not against, or to them, I guess, to a coach. It could be whomever, but you have that permission. And I think that was exemplified in the tennis player, Naomi Osaka. I think that, and like I said, I don't know the details, but it's brilliant. I applaud her for speaking out. I think she's going to do a lot for individuals in the sport. And then we also touched on, and I love what you said about this whole idea of if you are, and when you're in the competition, when you're in the pressure cooker, so to speak, not only are you supposed to speak out, but think about how you're going to start to transition and carry those skills on. And also, it's important. I love what you were saying about dealing with and being aware of once the games are ending, or even if you're still in the games and maybe your sport is over, but you're still there at the Olympic site, being aware of that sadness, or if it's disappointment or whatever it is, that drop off, feeling like you've come off the cliff. Just maybe even, would you agree that maybe even, Katherine, just being aware that these things might happen or you'll feel them could help you deal with them better?
I mean, it's a cycle, right? And know that there's resources and help for people to work yourself through that cycle, and you don't have to do it alone, right? And I think that's part of the process, and that's certainly why I've moved to athlete integrity. So you can go to athleteintegrity.com, and if we have coaches and, or come work with us and we can help you through that process. And we also work with teams and have a great structure to get athletes in integrity with themselves, learn how to do it, and learn how to carry that awareness and about yourself. And really what it does is it changes the dynamic that athletes who are our strongest people, and they end up in the most imbalanced relationships throughout their personal life and their professional life. And that is also the huge, what I'm trying to change is how to redistribute that power so the athlete doesn't just focus on, okay, what's the next thing?
Right.
Because also where they get lost in their identity, right? Because you're left to, this is the way the system is, versus let me develop and help you and teach you how to drive from the athlete within you. Let's light that fire. Let's light that flame. And that's for me where I want to help athletes currently in their athletic world and transition in a beautiful way and not have to feel like they've dropped off the cliff. Let us help work with you in that area. And that's, especially if you're an elite athlete. And so for me, that's what's really the most important thing, and that there are resources and you don't have to do it alone.
Do not do it alone.
Yeah.
Do not do it alone.
Yeah.
I agree. So then everyone go to it's the Athlete Within. You could just Google that.
Go to athleteintegrity.com.
Athleteintegrity.com. Okay. Do that. And then also I am going to put up on my website, jsaunderslawfirm.com, the national team agreement. I will highlight and, just offer some informational advice so you don't have to deal with that. Maybe you don't have access to counsel, access to advice, just some things that you can be aware of, and questions that you should ask. Because again, being in integrity with yourself, asking those questions also applies to these agreements and at all areas of your life. This was a great conversation. Tell everyone. So during the Olympics, do you always watch the swimming? Do you have a watch party? Do you not watch at all? What's your Olympic game plan?
So I'm on the board for the SoCal Olympians. And so we will do some sort of watch party. There's the LA 84 Foundation. And so it's a matter of what California's gathering limitations are, or no limitations.
That's true.
That will affect what we're doing. But there'll be something that we'll do.
That's great. Yeah. That's great. We're opening up a little bit, I think a little bit quicker than you guys are on the West Coast. Things are opening up. Some of the curfews are released, but the world is opening up again. Katherine, thank you so much for having this conversation with me. I really appreciate it. And we will talk again really soon. Take care of yourself.
All information and content in this podcast is provided for entertainment purposes only. Nothing in this podcast shall constitute legal advice and shall not create an attorney-client relationship. This information is general and may not be applicable to your particular circumstances. You should review your particular circumstances with an attorney. All liability with respect to actions taken or not taken based on the contents of this podcast is hereby expressly disclaimed.